Good morning or good afternoon wherever you are tuning in from, and welcome to today's ProcureCon webinar, Next Gen Automation in Procurement. Are you ready? Sponsored by EdgeVerve. Now, I'd like to bring everyone's attention to our really awesome console design. You'll notice on your main page, or console as we like to call it, we've got a few windows for you to toggle around through. From the speaker info to the resource tab to the slide view, please keep in mind that you can move these around to maximize or minimize them and fit whatever screen or device you're using to connect with us today. Speaking of the resource tab, we have some treats for everyone in attendance. Our media partner for today's webinar is Supply Chain World, and they've hooked us up with some really awesome content. So feel free to pop over into the resource tab at the bottom of your screen, and you can download them directly. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our main moderator for today's webinar, Shubham Tripathi, the client partner at Source to Pay at EdgeVerve Systems. Really glad to have him on board. So lastly from me, please be aware that we're going to try to save around 10 to 15 minutes or so at the top of the hour for a Q&A session. So make sure you hang on and feel free to ask our industry experts any questions you may have throughout the presentation. You can use the Q&A box feature right on your screen. So that's about enough housekeeping items for me. Let's get this webinar started. Off to you, Shubham.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shubham Tripathi, and I have on the call with me today Melissa Birkeland from Federal Mughal and Stacy Kravitz from Cushman and Wakefield, and I'm looking forward to having a wonderful discussion around what should be done if you are looking for an automation in procurement. And just to get started and set the context right, I just wanted to touch upon the journey that an organization can take from their current landscape to a completely automated procurement. So most of the organizations have implemented ERP. The prime purpose of implementing an ERP from a procurement standpoint was that you will automate most of the transactions that are done manually. However, what was seen that in spite of putting up best-in-class ERP solutions, the number of touchless transactions were just 10 to 20%. What it means from a procurement standpoint when I say touchless transactions is that apart from a requester and approver and a supplier, no one else gets involved. What we see today, that in spite of you having the best-in-class ERP, most of the transactions, there is a need of someone in procurement getting involved, someone from a support getting involved to do certain kind of transactions. From there on, a few organizations have moved on to e-procurement solution to solve a lot of these problems which came with implementing a ERP typically because you don't have catalogs. And when you implemented, say, a catalog-based e-procurement solution, it did solve the problem. However, the extent of automation was only around 30 to 50%. And this was predominantly due to the fact because, one, there was lack of services procurement solution. So, while goods you can buy very easily off catalogs, however, when you come to services, you still need to create something like a free text request, and that is something which led to a lot of manual transactions which have to be processed manually. From there on, what organizations have done or trying to move is to a self-service procurement solution, wherein they are bringing in solutions for services procurement. They are looking at new concepts like guided buying. They are looking at some best of breed solutions for invoice management in a self-service manner, or so to say, solutions which can enable that end users can themselves do most of the transactions. And that is something which increases your touchless transactions to say around 70 to 80%. However, it still leaves a lot of transactions in a process which remains, wherein a lot of work still has to be done manually. And we see, even in spite of self-service procurement, there is a big procurement team which is just doing some technical transactions of like a PR to PO, or doing some things like catalog management and things like that. So to solve that, what we see, there is a trend already in the industry wherein people are moving towards a robotic automation solution, trying to automate these residual tasks and trying to ensure that the number of touchless transactions increase as close to 90%. And what it leaves us is around 10% of the transactions which are more strategic in nature, and that is where the last mile comes in, wherein it needs something like artificial intelligence or a cognitive automation solution to automate the last mile. So this is the typical journey that we have seen. Different organizations are today at different miles of this journey, and people are trying to move from one phase to the next phase. So what we will be talking today is what you should take care of when you want to move from like one phase to the next phase. But before we go there, let us also understand what is procurement automation all about, and why there is so much buzzword around this topic. So today, for example, when you are looking at any task which is repetitive in nature, so for example, if you do PR to PO transaction, and in that PR to PO transactions, over a period of time, the person who is processing this PR knows that if this is a kind of request, I should be able to send this request to the supplier. So there are rules which ideally are in some rule book, or it is in their minds and they process that. But it is very manual and it is all rule based. So if you have something which is very repetitive and very rule based, we can actually create a software program which can automate these transactions. So to say, if you have a volume of say 100,000 purchase requests, out of which say 70,000 requests are going through a help desk which is processing the PR to PO transactions, by just creating a rule-based transfer from a PR to PO, we may be able to automate say around 50% of those, which is a very high number, and the residual number will still need someone because it needs some intelligence to process that particular purchase request. And that's where cognitive automation comes into picture, because something which you cannot create a rule, but this can be based on some kind of self-learning. So for example, in the same scenario, when you are trying to do a PR to PO automation, if we are getting requests from users for buying a particular goods or services based on the keyword over a period of time, we can learn and build a pattern to determine which supplier and what price that particular item should be bought at. So that is something wherein cognitive automation can help. So these are the two forms of automation that we generally see. Again, robotic automation, as I said, is completely process driven. You are just automating an existing process which is based on rules. Cognitive automation, on the other hand, is driven either based on a data pattern or based on unstructured data, which is basically around knowledge of an individual or the rules set up by an organization. Let us also look at what are the different scenarios, from a procurement perspective in the complete PR to PO cycle that can be automated. So, for example, one of the simplest scenario is at many organizations, there are requests which come from an Excel. So there are Excel templates that users keep, and they need to be keyed in. This is also very specific to a preparer scenario, wherein a business unit has a preparer who collects all the requests and tries to upload them into the system. So from that perspective, this can be automated, wherein the Excel can come and it can go into the system. The PR can get created and it can get converted to a PO. So that is one of the simplest scenario. Say the next scenario that you can also look at in the same cycle is, say, when the PR is sent for an approval. Most organizations that I have experienced with, the budget system is not very tightly integrated in the PR approval process. So what happens, you generally approve a PR without the knowledge of the budget, which then gets stopped by the finance, because there was no budget available. So we can give the manager itself access to a small, interface using which they can check whether the budget is available in some external system, which is very useful to approve or reject a particular transaction. If we move along from a PR to PO flip, this is something that I talked about. But here also, many times, because what happens, most organizations today do not have a contract system which speaks with their procurement system. And hence, when the PO goes out, there are less than 50% chance that you will have a contract number assigned in a PO. So we can put up a software program or a robot which can populate the contract number for a PO based on certain rules and knowledge that it will learn over a period of time. From there on, if you move to a PO collaboration scenario, we can also look at, if while I am sending that PO, I am assigning a particular supplier, but what can also happen in my system that there can be duplicate vendors. So while I'm trying to create a PO itself, I can be told a scenario that there are multiple vendors who are the same vendors, and you may have different contracts because they were creating at different points in time. So which contract to be used from these duplicate vendors for this particular scenario, the software programs can help you doing that. Similarly, we have seen scenarios wherein the orders are open even after they have been received because the goods receipt was not done in the system. We can write programs, software robots, which can actually go and look at all of such orders, and based on certain rules and conditions, they can close those orders to bring in more compliance and to basically release a lot of discrepancies which are there in the system. From there, if we move to an invoicing scenario, this is area where we have seen the maximum automation happening in the last 1.5 years, wherein people are looking at how to automate the whole intake process of the invoice, to how to build some contract compliance scenarios, how to check duplicate invoices, and things like that. So these are some of the areas for automation which organizations are doing. Apart from that, there are other scenarios which are around strategic procurement, which is mainly around sourcing, wherein you can also do some automation from that particular perspective. Having said that, I will now pass on this session where I will invite Melissa and Stacy to basically share their experience on their journey, where they are and where what they have done. So one of the first questions that comes to my mind is, if an organization is looking at this particular journey, how do you prepare to bid on procurement automation? Melissa?
Yes, with my current team, I walked in when they were about to sign a contract for a P2P solution to automate it because they're using a mismatch of SharePoint sites and various different systems. And so I had the team take a step back and said that I didn't feel that they were ready to, that we really had to start cleaning up our data. We needed to start solidifying our policies and procedures, and we weren't in a position to jump into a new relationship and automate it. And so what we've been doing is taking a step back as we vet out on who we want to use for our solution. And we actually started mapping things out, looking at, I think it was about 30 different systems that we're using, and how can we get that down to one. And so with us, it was really just put the brakes on it, slow down, and get things solidified so we can truly automate it and make a more impactful changes.
Great, Melissa. Stacy, do you want to add to that from your experience?
Yes, I'll mention that one thing to think about is not really to stress or worry over picking the right tool. Quite frankly, if you're including all of the top tier P2P systems in your RFP, you really can't go wrong. You're likely not going to make a mistake with your award. Each technology has different bells and whistles, but at the end of the day, it comes down to preference, and they're all going to do the job for you as far as the bidding and selection. What's really going to be critical is the selection of an implementation partner, someone that you could partner well with, your project planning, and then ultimately your strategy towards training and adoption. Those are going to be key. So that would just be a tip that I would say when you're preparing your RFP. Just make sure that you do your research up front, but don't sweat too much about your selection.
Great. Some very valid points, Melissa and Stacy. I just wanted to add, from my discussions with few organizations looking out for, looking at a sourcing and procurement technology and an automation solution. Few questions that people are asking are, what is like a roadmap for 2020 and beyond? Because that is very important, which needs to be considered. The second is the technology landscape, as we all know, is changing really fast. There are these new concepts that we are talking about, robotic automation or cognitive automation. But then there are newer technologies, like blockchain, which is going to come. And how will the technology for tomorrow is going to leverage that? And do we leverage them today? How well we are tuned to do that? Another question that keeps coming is, while we are deploying the technology platform, if we already have an existing investment, what happens to them? Do I need to look at taking them off? Can I leverage that? And what should I do? And last is, how do I get a best of breed, application experience, without worrying about integration? Because no one wants to compromise on a functionality if you ask a business user. So that becomes, very, very critical. In short, one of the key things is before we go in this journey of preparing a bid, we need to look for a solution that is future-proof, which includes all the technology concepts. And this is something which, all organizations that are going should look at from my perspective. My next question is around how do you introduce procurement technology initiatives company-wide? And Stacy, please share your inputs on how do you go about it when you were looking for.
Okay. So the experience at Cushman was unique, might be a little different than your own. We have let's think of it as two separate sides of the business. We have the corporate side and a commercial side, and we had very strong P2P systems and processes in place on our commercial side from a standpoint of supporting the clients. Where we did not have strong procure-to-pay was on our corporate side for the day-to-day corporate purchases. So when I joined the legacy Cushman organization in 2013, they actually did not have a procurement tool at all. We were going through, it was a pretty stable environment. We didn't realize that just around the horizon was going to be a merger with another organization, but we set out to put in a P2P tool and process, and no sooner did we do the RFP, select the tool, and have the business case approved, where we found out that we were going to move to a global solution for our finance and HR, which included procurement. So we were in an interesting position in such that we had to make a decision whether we should go ahead with the P2P implementation as planned or whether we were going to wait for the new tool. And what we ended up doing was going ahead with the plan and implementing, because we wanted to get these users who, on the corporate side, who were not familiar with P2P at all, we wanted to get them engaged with the process, understand the concept of having spend approved before engaging with a supplier. So in the past, they were just used to, ordering the goods and services they needed, taking an invoice, and having it processed for payment. So we wanted them to get used to the concept of having a requisition approved upfront for the spend and then having a PO issued to the supplier. We wanted to train them on how to use the technology, and the technology, quite frankly, was the easy part. The more difficult part was explaining to them the processes and the concepts behind P2P. So we actually implemented that tool first, and shortly after go live, and even throughout the rollout of that tool, we explained to them that a new tool was coming soon thereafter, but that to get started on this tool and almost use it as your practice. And it actually worked out very well for us. It was a learning curve for those users, and it prepped us for the wider global rollout and also prepared us for a situation where we did go through a merger and the organization grew quite a bit, and it laid the groundwork for being able to continue with that rollout. So what I would say, really the takeaway from it is similar to what I said earlier about the technology, being able to do what you need it to do. The training part of that technology is also not the difficult part from the point-and-click perspective, but you will need to do a lot of training when it comes to the process, the policy behind it, and then focusing on your future plans with how you're going to continue to drive adoption and improve the user experience.
Great. That's really informative. Melissa, do you want to add anything?
Just to elaborate on what Stacy said, is definitely, like she said, as long as they're going to those top tier providers, what we did is try to find a thought leader for us. And so we gave them the process map, all our different processes, and where did they see improvements and gains, and that was helpful for the whole team. Because we're so antiquated and very far behind, it was really good to understand what they could bring for us in helping us improve our processes, reduce leakage, and improve compliance.
Great insights, and thanks, Melissa and Stacy, for that. I just wanted to add some couple of points. The way we are seeing as well on trends around that. So, while when we look at a self-service, procurement solution, as Stacy was pointing out, you are trying to put in a solution for which will automate, and we have to train users. One thing which comes to my mind, which is also very important, which we need to keep in mind, is around the content. So while we can train the users and they can look at the solution, the content is also very important, and we have to really plan for that content. And when I say content, the content that I'm talking about is building catalogs, getting preferred suppliers for the key categories that you have, And of course, it's a journey, but if it is not done well, we also run a risk that these technology initiatives, are seen that they are not really successful, because then the adoption does not happen. So, while we look at all aspects, we also need to plan this content aspect and, how we will bring suppliers in a very easy format. Another thing that we are also looking at is there can be small areas around the current process that you have, while you are implementing the new technology, or you are trying to introduce any kind of, technology solution in procurement. We also need to look at the current processes and see if there is an opportunity for us to basically create a process improvement scenario. And if we are able to do that, what does it mean? So, for example, we can implement a small robot which will solve a very small problem, but it goes in a long way. For example, if you have a team which is assigned to build a catalog solution, the building of catalogs can be done by a team, but the managing of catalog, ensuring that they are kept up to date, can be actually done by a software robot. And this is something as a trend that we are now seeing where organizations are looking at that. With that, I will move on to my last question. And the question is, how do you think policy plays into your procurement technology initiatives? Stacy, do you want to give some insights on that?
Sure. What I would say here is without a strong policy and absolutely without accounts payable support, it's going to be really nearly impossible to enforce the use of procurement technology. The technology is only going to be as good as the support that you have behind it. You really need to partner with accounts payable, have a strong procurement policy that states that you're going to follow a procure-to-pay policy and that you're going to require purchase orders. Otherwise, you're not really going to get the traction. Another thing to think about is quite frankly, your best win is going to be when you make it so easy to use the system that you don't even have to rely on the policy anymore. You shouldn't have to point to the policy. You should make people want to use the technology because of the simplicity and the process efficiency, and not necessarily need to point to a policy to make your case for your users.
Very good insights, Stacy there. Melissa, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, what we've been doing is we've been solidifying all the business processes and doing monthly audits to make sure that people are adhering to it, and then giving them those friendly reminders to make sure, because we are taking baby steps to be able to get to a fully automated solution with punch-out catalogs, and that's our ideal state. And so we're just making incremental improvements and then making sure people are following us along this journey and along this learning curve.
Great. So I just wanted to also add, in terms of what will happen, in kind of tomorrow, because technology is maturing as we speak. So what we are looking at these policies. There are two ways in which organizations are looking at ensuring the policy compliance. One is definitely putting in a self-service procurement solution which abstracts the policy from the user, as Stacey pointed out, that it should be so simple for the user and the policy can be in the background. So, for example, when I am doing search, the search result is governed by the policy, and the end user does not even know that they are searching on a content which is pre-approved by the procurement teams. So we can increase compliance from that perspective and ensure that all the policies are in place. Another example there is that if you have a supplier risk associated with some supplier, we can block them, and they will not even come in any kind of search results, so the users cannot place requests from suppliers which will increase the risk for us. And from an audit perspective as well, we can look at, building these software robots, which can basically help us bringing in compliance in different areas. So for example, one of the areas where we see one of the great potential is that when I'm paying for an invoice, I can just put up a small software program which does a duplicate invoice check before I do the payment, so that the number of such instances will really go down because the invoice processor in their SOP knows that there is an invoice processing check has to be done, and now they have a tool to go and actually check that. So this ensures that while we do the actual audit, the number of such non-compliance automatically comes down. So with that, I think I'm towards the end of this session, and we have some questions which have come up. So one of the first questions that I see is, how much time and effort will it take to implement a procurement technology or a procurement automation solution? What is the typical timelines? Stacy, Melissa, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. I could say that the technology solution can be fairly quick. You might look at 16 weeks to 6 months, depending on the scope of your integrations. What I would say is, again, from the time that you're doing your RFP to your launch, maybe you're looking at anywhere from 4 months to 6 months. You can do it quicker. What I would say, though, until you have your traction and see your engagement, that could take upwards to a year until you're using it to the extent that you hope to use it. And quite frankly, that could also just be the tip of the iceberg until you really start pressing on that user adoption.
Great. One of the next question that we have is, how much IT involvement is typically required for this procurement automation implementation? Can it be done completely by the implementation partner, or do we need to involve the IT, and how much effort has you have seen based on your experience? Melissa, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually what we're doing is we're having our purchasing IT lead liaison actually lead the RFP process. And so I worked with her on the bidders list, and then they're leading the whole RFP, the demonstrations, and the scorecarding. And so that's been a really strong partnership and has been helpful. And so they mapped out all the systems of our current state and then where we want to be ideally, and then helping us with timelines and everything else. So it's been great leveraging the IT project management team.
Great. One of the questions that we have also received is, can we use robotic automation for an organization where production type is configuration to order? You procure a component when customer order is received, so variety of configuration is high based on customer specifications. Great question. From my experience, as I said, if you are doing something today which is based on rules, so if I see this configure to order process, you will have certain rules that you are following when you are placing the order. We can automate the same as well. If you cannot write the rules on a paper, that is where it becomes a cognitive automation solution, wherein we can also learn from the decisions which have been taken in the past for similar orders and what has been done, and we can propose to the processor in terms of what is the best case scenario based on the historical data that is there. One more question is, I would like to understand the balance of internal and external resources for implementation, not RFP. What is the typical model?
I can speak a little
sure.
to that.
So
I've actually worked on implementations kind of with both solutions. So in every implementation I've worked on, we have had an external partner. The extent to how much we relied on that partner really depended on the complexity and the size of what we were doing. So in certain cases, we relied very heavily on a third party consultant to pull that together for us. And then on smaller implementations, we really leveraged the resources, the IT support that we had internally to be able to put the system in place. So I guess the answer to that really is it depends. It depends on the scale. And again, I'll point to the integrations. It depends on how complex you are going to get with your implementation and your integrations.
Great insight. The next question that we have is, how do you increase engagement internally with user adoption? Is it best to make it mandatory for projects over a certain amount of money, or to slowly roll it out department to department? Any thoughts, Malisha and Stacy?
Yeah, I've used it for a threshold by a dollar amount at all the organizations I've been at, and that's been very successful in making sure that it's automated and when there's no strategy behind it, and it's purely just a transactional purchase.
Great. Yeah. We have another question. Once I implement procurement automation, what will happen to my headcount? And this is basically the retained organization. I can basically, try to answer that from my experience. What we have seen is, when you implement an automation solution, we are basically looking at automating the very repetitive tasks. So there is typically a bandwidth which gets freed up from these tactical tasks, and which we see organization leveraging towards more strategic tasks like supplier management, and that is one of the core benefits when you look at our robotics automation solution. The next question that we have with automation, if we are able to achieve more than 90% automation, is it the end of transformation journey for an organization? What do you think will be the next milestone? So basically, when we say that there is a 90% automation done and you are recognizing the benefits, as I initially covered, this is more around your procurement processes, and that's where the work moves and it becomes very strategic. You will be able to look for areas and opportunities that today we are not able to focus because we do not have enough time, because we get stuck up in maintaining the transactional procurement work. So then we can look at risk, for example, compliance from a different perspective. We can try to look at different models and how we can benefit and make procurement more strategic. So the work never ends. It just shifts, and you go up the value chain where you are then looking at more value for an organization based on the work that we are doing. This brings us to the end of today's webinar. I will be happy to answer any questions further. My contact details are already there. Hope you enjoyed the webinar today. Please feel free to get in touch with any one of us on Twitter, LinkedIn. Thank you for your time today. And thank you, Stacy and Melissa. It was really great getting insights from your experience, and I hope everyone find it really valuable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. So I just want to take a moment to thank the audience for attending today's webinar, and thank you to our amazing speakers and our great moderator for participating. So if there were any additional questions that we weren't able to get to, or if you just want to follow up on the conversation that we had for the Q&A session, we have some contact details on the screen right in front of you, so feel free to jot those down. Following the closing of this webinar, we would like to hear your feedback. So please participate in a really quick survey that we have. It's about just 2 questions, shouldn't take a moment of your time. And feel free to share any comments or suggested topics that you want to discuss on future webinars. As mentioned in a few of the questions that we received today, the presentation is going to be available for on-demand view in about 24 hours. And so you're all automatically set to receive that information. So keep an eye out for that email to come through. So from EdgeVerve, Supply Chain World, and the ProcureCon team here at Worldwide Business Research, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Till next time, take care.